This Choircast podcast is brought to you by High Minds. Join host Andy Colenso and Matthew J. DiStefano as they tackle culture, justice, spirituality, and all the big questions shaping our world. High Minds isn't about talking points or hot takes. It's about deep, insightful conversation that inspires and challenges. Tune in to explore new angles, question the status quo, and elevate your thinking. Listen to High Minds wherever you get your podcasts.
Liminal. A word 1,000 miles wide but small enough to fit into the present moment. It describes an in-between place. We live most of our lives within this space, not quite ever arriving at our idealistic final destination. We spend so much of our energies on our best impersonation of who we wish we were, until we can't. But in sneaks a dark night of the soul, or perhaps a mystical experience. Our way of being has an error loop introduced. Today we call that deconstruction. Welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast, where we teach you how to be here, how to traverse these spaces, and where we can go if we remain humble, open, and honest. Hitting the ground running with Scot McKnight. Welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast. It's good to see you today.
Good to see you, Tom. Good to be back.
How are you doing since the election results have come in? How are you hanging in there as a Christian, as a pastoral individual, as a theologian? Like how is your emotional mental state?
I don't vest my energies in a sense in who's elected, but I'm very discouraged by the percentage of people, the number of votes. I mean, it's like 3 million now, 2.5 million. It wasn't as disparate as the numbers were first. It's just very surprising the number of people who, let's say, call themselves Christians, evangelicals, who align themselves with Donald Trump. I guess I can live with the fact that some people are Republicans and they will never vote for a Democrat. I can live with that. But I think there should be a line drawn on character and transparency, truthfulness, and the kinds of people that he's surrounding himself with. I'm right now reading a book by Ruth Ben-Ghiat called Strong Men.
Oh, I think I've heard of this.
And it's a history. Have you heard of this book?
I think so. I haven't read it, but I've heard of this.
It's a history of the, let's say, the tyrants, the narcissistic leaders, the dictators, basically of the 20th century. But it goes back especially to Mussolini, because I believe the woman grew up, the author, she's a professor of history in New York. She seems to be a specialist in Italian history. I think she grew up there. And so there's a lot about Mussolini, but a lot about Hitler. And she brings in Trump, and the patterns of behaviors between these people are pretty easy to sketch. And of course, if you're looking for something, you can find it. But I find the ring of truth in her descriptions, and it doesn't bode well for a culture that is open and honest and rational, that will lead to justice and peace in our culture. I think it's going to be some tough sledding for 4 years. So, yeah. I try to follow Jesus, and I try to keep my eye on him, and what I'm called to do, which is not to be a political commentator or to spend all my day sorting through the latest news about what's happening in Washington, D.C., but it's pretty hard to avoid, and I'm an American, and I get asked about these things.
Yeah.
Just like you did.
I think, there is having opinions on economic issues, there's having opinions on foreign affairs, having opinions on policies and agendas and all of that stuff. And I have light opinions on those things based on, my own readings and who I'm listening to. And as everybody has some opinions in that realm. But when when it comes down to how do we talk about this stuff in the church, I think we need to really hone in on so we don't become partisan. I think we need to hone in on, the ethics of
That's right.
of the thing. How are the poor and marginalized going to be treated in this? And so it's really
And
hard
the kind
to
of
have
culture and the kind of culture that's forming around certain kinds of leaders.
Yeah. That's in our ballpark. That's in our wheelhouse.
I agree. Yeah, I do not align myself with a political party. Although at one time I used to say, probably 20 years ago, 25, I would say I vote Democrat because I think they got their heart in the right place. But I quit. I don't vote. I don't vote. I live in a state that's going blue no matter what's going to happen. But vote locally. I would vote locally, but I don't want any way to be accused of being aligned with a political party so that I couldn't make the kinds of moral statements that I think I need to make.
Okay.
So
now, would that change if you were in a swing state?
No.
Okay.
No, my point is I want to be able to. So when President Obama was elected, and the first day that he was elected, he immediately signed a bill that permitted greater abortions, and I spoke against that. When Trump was elected, I was able to speak against what Trump was doing. And I understand that if I say anything that has moral statement connected to a politician, that it sounds like I'm either for or against that politician. But I think if people pay attention to me long enough, they'll realize that I'm an equal opportunity critic when it comes to these matters, that I want to evaluate things on the basis of a kingdom vision and what would be just in American society according to our Constitution, which are not the same things. So that's what I want to be able to. I want to be able to have that kind of independence. Locally, I think local elections are a completely different bird.
Yeah, I think those are more important than we like to admit ourselves. But yeah. Why do you think that Why do you think the radical right has been so attractive to Christians in the West?
Well, if you do you know about the brand new book by Matthew Taylor called The Violent Shall Take It by Force?
I think I've heard that title again. But.
It's a brand new book, Matthew Taylor, Broadleaf Books in Minnesota. And I have it on my Substack today, but it's only for paid subscribers because it's semi-political. It is a fascinating study of how evangelicalism has been aligned with Donald Trump in ways that many evangelicals would say, who are these people? Who are these evangelicals who are so gung-ho about Trump? I don't run into these people. Well, this Matthew Taylor has analyzed 4 quadrants on the basis of whether someone's denominational or charismatic, non-denominational or non-charismatic, so he's got 4. And it's the charismatic, non-denominational, independent, charismatic Pentecostal churches that have leaders like Paula White and Dutch Sheets and Lance Wallnau. Have you heard of these names? Yeah. These are the people who are aligned with Donald Trump, and they're in the inner circle of Donald Trump. And these are people who are never discussed in evangelical context or in the discussions of what is an evangelical. And there are millions of these people, millions. So there's a big thing. Now, there is a trend right now in the world, and I don't have an explanation for this, but there's a trend of rightist leaders being elected. And whether they're elected or they usurp authority or there's coups, there's a lot of this going on.
Yeah.
And a lot of it has to do with let's say, the postmodern world and changes and immigration and cultures being threatened. There's a lot of that going on, and a lot of nations are responding by having people react, and they're reacting with sort of a forceful, old-fashioned, nostalgic theory of what we were and make our country great again. So when Donald Trump uses that motto, it's a motto being used throughout the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. A lot of young people have lost. I guess I'm talking with one today, and she said, I'm a Christian, but I hate using a modifier on the end of that word when I tell people that I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian, but I'm not this.
Yeah.
And a lot of young people are getting, I guess, exhausted with. Do you see a lot of young people kind of exiting the church right now, and do you think politics is playing a role in that?
Well, this is part of what was going on in the book that Tommy Phillips and I wrote, Invisible Jesus.
Yeah.
A book, they call the subtitle a book about. That was kind of funny that I've never seen a subtitle with the word book, but I suppose there's a lot of them. A book about leaving the church and looking for Christ. And I don't have numbers. No one has numbers that I'm aware of, but Tommy thinks, and he's in touch with so much of this stuff because of his traveling with his band. He thinks the number one reason why the young people, and it's not just young people, but let's just say young people are leaving the church, is politics. Now, when Dan Kimball wrote his book years ago, They Like Jesus But Not the Church, one of the I think his number one reason for leaving the church was about politics. At the time, I had conversations with Dan, and he had so many conversations in his coffee shops in his beautiful seaside area south of San Jose, that he felt like the issue was as much that the politics being presented in the church were not the people's politics that they liked. In other words, it's not that they thought the church was too political, is that the church that they were attending wasn't political in the way they were political. I think there's some truth in that. And it's pretty sad to me that churches have so aligned politically and in a partisan way that someone can say, I want to go to a church which is not so political, but really they want it to be political. And let's just say they're in a church, they're embedded in a church they grew up in that is very Republican, and they're talking about red, white, and blue, and they got a flag behind the pulpit, and they defend the Republican Party at all costs, and they make it clear from the pulpit where they stand. It's sad that someone who is more of a Democrat doesn't feel comfortable in a church because of their politics. And I tell people all the time, Tom, if you're in England or if you're in Germany or you're in Denmark, there aren't any Republicans. I mean, the most conservative side would be a left-wing Democrat. I remember having a conversation with some Danes who told me that they thought there was no distinction between McCain and Obama. They said they're both right-wingers for us.
Wow.
They said you don't have any genuine lefties in the United States running for president. I mean, they're all social democrats and socialists, and even further. So that's where Europe is. And I'm thinking, how can we pretend like true evangelicalism is like the Republican Party when that would alienate us from the rest of the world, especially all of Europe? And it's more than Europe. It's any place the Protestant church has touched and landed. Those areas around the world are not going to be like Republican Party in the United States. And I think this is something that American evangelicals need to face with some honesty and some truth.
Yeah. You said that a lot of that charismatic independent stream, I see that for sure. But then there's a strong, like, conservative, what do they call that? Like Mark Driscoll posting on his Twitter that you can't be a Christian if you didn't vote for, Donald Trump. And the whole group that he represents over there would be separate from the Pentecostal group over here. How many, like, why are we so comfortable, whether it be these political or the Pentecostals or these conservative, complementarians? Why are we so comfortable with authoritarian leaders as Christians to begin with? And those are two polar opposite sides that would probably like tear their faces off if you got them in a theological debate.
Yeah, well, they would. Driscoll, I don't follow Mark Driscoll, but I would see him probably in the Reformed.
Yes, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you.
Reconstructionist, a dominionist type people.
Yeah.
And that group is aligned with Donald Trump. And dominionism is a part of the independent charismatic group. They're all the Seven Mountains mandate of Lance Wallnau. Emerged out of it's a radical form of Kuyperianism, which it's not Kuyperianism.
Okay, that's
it's
a big
radical
word.
Form.
Kuyperianism. Help me understand that word.
Abraham Kuyper is the foundation of most conservative evangelicals' political perceptions.
Okay,
and that is it's sort of an influential. You're called to be an influence in the major spheres of American society: education,
media,
family,
markets,
media,
family.
That's right.
Politics.
Economics.
Those are the seven mountains.
Yeah, there's seven. But they wouldn't go. Kuyper called them spheres.
Okay.
Church is one of them. But the seven mountains is Lance Wallnau and connected to C. Peter Wagner, the New Apostolic Reformation and the this independent charismatic group that's so big that is discussed in Matthew Taylor's book. This, I'd say Driscoll is a dominionist. I'm guessing. I don't know that for sure, but that group has influence and has alignment at times with this group that is connected now to Trump on the inner circle. But there's an authoritarianism. And you've pointed out something very important here, that likes great men and likes the big man and likes the guy who will lower the boom, is what I grew up hearing from my family. And that meant, use their authority. And there's a lot of Christians who like that. And that's another group. White supremacists, nationalists, that's another group that's involved in this issue as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Tom, I've talked more on your podcast about politics than I have of all my podcasts combined.
Well, I am trying as a pastor to not be partisan, not tie myself to the other end of the spectrum of politics, but to pastorally take on. I had two kinds of people in my church on, the Sunday after election, and those who were dancing in the streets and those who couldn't get out of bed the day after the election.
Yeah.
And I was thinking to myself, how do I take this? How do I pastor both of these groups of people in my church, in my community? Some, they're rejoicing that their person won and they think he's going to come in and fix everything, and some are mourning and couldn't get out of bed, calling into work and just saying this is the end of democracy. And I don't want to be partisan, but I have to pastor these people.
Mm-hmm.
And I know when it comes to grounds of ethics and theology, it's like we can talk about things. I don't have to be quiet about politics if I keep it in the arena of we follow a liturgical calendar. We're coming to Christ the King Sunday, which is to combat nationalism in the church, founded in 1929. So we can talk about nationalism and the cult of nationalism and false messiahship and those types of things. So the reason I have these questions is because, one, you wrote a book about people leaving the church, and it feels like they're doing that over this 81% of people of the evangelical stream tying themselves to Trump. And two, I'm trying to pastorally lead people through this and not become so partisan that a Republican wouldn't be comfortable sitting and worshiping with a Democrat.
But even if you talk about, for some people, if you are critical of Christian nationalism, you are a Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
That's how. But we have to ask ourselves how we got into this position. And we got into this position because we did not teach political discipleship over the years. We have not taught the evangelical church how to think about politics in the context of the sovereignty of Christ or the lordship of Jesus. And as a result, there are a lot of people who have surrendered their faith to a political party and to the next election. And people, I think Christians really have to ask themselves where their faith is if they are absolutely devastated by an election. I mean, do we believe that Jesus is the Lord and that our responsibility is to follow Jesus? And I would say this all over again, is that, Berlusconi in Italy was to the right of Donald Trump, and Italy survived. And America will survive. This is not going to be the undoing of democracy, in spite of the apocalyptic rhetoric. I think that there are things being done that are very discouraging at the democratic process, but we have a big populace. I mean, we have 330 million people, and the tide can change, and that my lifetime has gone. Let's just however you want to do it. It goes up and down. The people that one party is for, it goes up and down. It goes up and down, and over time, there's a balancing act that I value about the American political process. But I really believe that we need to reevaluate all over again. And Tom, I've been saying this for 25 years. We need to reevaluate how we're talking about politics, and we need to reevaluate political discipleship so that Christians can vote and not be devastated if the party they vote for and not be devastated if their party loses. It's just like I cheer for the Cleveland Guardians in baseball, and they got beat by the New York Yankees. And I was sad for the Guardians, but you know what? I got up the next day and I started watching the next games till the World Series was over. And so I wasn't devastated. I think and that's sports, some people are into sports as much as other people are into politics. I think that our devastation is an indicator of our discipleship.
Are you going through a faith transition? I can relate. And I've written a book to help us through this process. My name is Jackie Turner, and the book is called Tumbled People: Deconstructing and Reconstructing Your Faith. It walks us through the stages of faith development, as well as offering practical spiritual practices you can try at home, or you can do it in a group. It comes with journaling pages too, so you can write in it, and it's only $10 on Amazon. I hope you check it out, and we can walk this journey together, because there is hope after deconstruction.
I'm with you on the if you voted Republican because you just can't vote for a Democrat ever. Like, I understand that, but when it comes to like Christians tying their well-being and faith to a savior named Donald Trump. Like, I feel I was very sad Wednesday when I woke up. I just, it feels more for me like I get Republicans going to vote Republican, but Christians, I felt betrayed. I felt betrayed, and that hurt. And then I had to get up and do something about it.
I know, and there is no difference in the last, 4 elections. Evangelicals have been about 80% for a Republican candidate. And probably if Mitt Romney ran again, there would be about 80% for him. Of course, he never really ran, did he? Did he run? I can't even remember.
Yes, I think he ran against Obama's second term.
Okay, so they're going to vote. They're going to vote that way. I get that, but it's the idolatry dimension of it that bothers me the most, and it's the lack of perception of culture that is being created right now in the political process that is disturbing. And I think my response is, what can I do to move the needle a little bit toward a more Christian, rational, responsible political orientation in the church? People care.
Yeah.
Let's face it. People who are business people, they care about who is elected. And people who are minorities, women, persons of color, second generation African American or Mexican Americans, Asian Americans, they care about who the president is because it matters to their life deeply. And I want people to care. It's okay to care. That's what we should do. But we can care as Christians at a completely different level, that in our church we can create a culture that transcends what happens in the political culture in the United States. And that's what I'd like to spend my next decade working on, talking about.
Well, I have a question. I kind of texted some people that are listeners of my show, and I said, I'm Scott talking with you, submit some questions, and then I kind of synthesized some of them together. And one of them was really interesting, and they said the declaration of Christ as King is a declaration of political dissent, as opposed to Caesar is Lord or Caesar is the King. So how does that work in a democracy where we're invited to participate in electing our own leaders?
Well, all politics is about compromise. There is no such thing as a pure. You're not going to get everybody agreeing on a candidate, on everything that candidate stands for, and that everything that candidate stands for, then in the political processes, once elected, will be able to consistently maintain those views. I mean, politics is about compromise. So I believe we have to maintain dissent when it comes to our faith. We have to maintain dissent when it comes to our political perceptions. So, let's say you are conservative when it comes to economics, and you have a candidate and you have a president who is a progressive or socialist, a social democrat in orientation. And you can dissent from their economic policies because of your political position, but I would say we should dissent as Christians when economic policies are hurting the least of these, when the economic policies are favoring the rich at the expense of the poor. I think we're going to always have poor people and we're going to always have rich people. I don't know of any society that doesn't. But I think as Christians, we want to stand for things that would be just. I do not understand why Americans don't believe in health care for all people. I think everybody should have health care. I also believe that all Americans who work full-time should earn a wage that is sufficient for living. Unless, of course, if you choose to be a full-time artist and you sold one measly watercolor this week, then you've made a choice to live in such a way that you get to perform what you love to do, but it doesn't mean you're going to make enough money. But by and large, I think our wages should be commensurate and should be responsible. So I believe that we can fight for those kinds of things at the moral level as Christian principle, and other things that we're going to fight for that would be a little bit more at the political, let's just say, pragmatic level of how we make judgments. And I think in all of those areas we can be dissenters and we can be affirmers. We can be in favor of someone, assenters and dissenters.
I like that. That's good. When we do dissent, when we do push back, there's a specific way in which we do it that Christ has taught us through nonviolence, the way of love, the way of peace. And someone wrote in and says that kind of dissent and resistance is often very slow. So how do we resist imminent threats effectively while remaining true to the slow ways of love and peace?
Well, we're in a culture that we would prefer had a different kind of culture so that the violence would not be necessary. I think that there are ways for Christians to resist, to boycott, to put their bodies on the line, to put their, let's say, safety in jeopardy, to put their job on the line. And I think those would be the kinds of things that we would do that could be a little bit more immediate. That we can publicly take a stand. And, I've done this in my life on different occasions. I remember lecturing in a class when the United States was thinking of going to Iraq. And I made it clear in class that I thought it was inappropriate, it was wrong for Christians to participate in war. I mean, I didn't just say, the Christians differ. They do, and I respect the fact that Christians can differ. But I put my position out there in the class, and I had some students yelling at me in the classroom whose brothers were going to be in the war, and they were really angry with me. And it jeopardized my status as a professor in that classroom, at least for that day, if not for some people for the rest of the time. They just thought I was totally, it was totally wrong to do that. So I think that there's ways to dissent that are a little bit more pushy, aggressive, upfront, immediate, urgent, without it turning into violence.
Okay. The reason I want to have this conversation in this direction is because I'm trying to plot out the pathway to pastorally talk about politics without being adopted by the opposite end of what I perceive as what we're fighting against, and just become a tool of the other side's political agenda. I remain fairly independent myself. I did vote, but how can pastors speak out when they believe that whatever regime is up there, whatever president is up there, is becoming oppressive? How can pastors speak out about that without becoming partisan tools for the other side's political agenda?
Okay, all right. This is a good question, and I do think if you're going to speak against a current president, you're going to be perceived as for the other president, whether you are or not. So this is the makeup of American culture, and it's sad that it's a part of the church. So I think you face that. But I would say this, that if a pastor has a responsibility over the next 4 years to preach a series or 2 or 3 or 4, maybe 1 a year, that will take up the issues of what I would call political discipleship, or theopolitical discipleship, as in the book of Revelation that we talked about one time. about discipleship, and a series that would over time create a culture in a church where they say, this is the way we look at politics. We are trying to follow Jesus, and to the degree that we follow Jesus, we can support this position and we can support that position so that we can become independent in our judgment. And then we would be able to speak against a candidate without being perceived as for a different candidate, but instead of being for a candidate and against a candidate, we're perceived as for Jesus and therefore against this. That's the culture that I think we need to strive to nurture and create in our churches, where our politics are shaped by our allegiance to Jesus Christ as Lord rather than to a political party.
I really like that crafting of a culture that has these conversations, so that it is to be expected that we will. I don't think we've done that very well. Pastors have kind of been quiet about all politics and just letting the church be co-opted by.
Well, Tom, you're a pastor. You know what this means. When you bring up political topics, people leave the church. They walk out the door. But that's because we've created a culture where our politics are not the politics of Jesus. They're the politics of American society. And so over time, that's why I'm saying at least a series a year, that will create a allegiance to Jesus Christ as our fundamental political orientation.
Yeah. Now, a lot of Christians were fearful of Democrats imposing, their social agendas upon the church, and taking away tax exemption if you don't marry a gay couple, or things like that are political footballs or whatever. So then I think they gravitate towards the right, which then has fits their social things a little bit better. But then we have something like a Project 2025 that kind of comes out, scares a lot of people, and it feels like the church went from this, we won't be oppressed, but then partnering with an oppressive force in the government. So how does a Christian remain faithful when this has happened, when you didn't want to become the oppressive force on the other side or the oppressive force on this side? How do you remain faithful to the Christian calling, to the gospel, to being a pastor, when the church is being co-opted as an oppressive force in the world?
Well, this is Constantinianism, or at best, maybe at best Erastianism, which is the church surrendering to the government. I think we have to recognize that the United States is a pluralistic culture, society.
We're uncomfortable with that as Christians, but go on.
I mean, we have to admit that people,
it is.
It's not. We have what used to be called a melting pot, but of course that was the colonizing of culture. But it's at least a salad bowl where people are different, and we have to. I mean, if we don't accept that, we are on the path of being oppressors. Christianity that oppresses non-Christians has completely violated the gospel. One of the secrets of Christianity is choice and the respect of another person to decide for or against Jesus Christ. That's one of the ground rules for Christianity. If it doesn't permit that, it has become just an oppressive force. So I think that we would want to resist any governmental policies that would restrict let's say the freedom of religion and the freedom of choice for other people. I know I would. I know I would speak against that.
So some of these school districts, like in Oklahoma, that are kind of demanding that the Bible be taught in schools, would that be one of those areas?
Are you in Oklahoma?
I am not. I'm in Michigan.
Okay. I would say that's wrong. I would say Christians should not support that. They should not support that. In the end, this will hurt the church more than help the church.
Mm-hmm.
The banning of the Bible from school is also something to be resisted. Is that the Christianity is a part of American history. It's a part of American culture. We need to respect that, and we need to teach students what that means in a responsible, let's say, mutually acceptable form, without it being conversionistic, without it being proselytizing, and just teach. This is what Christianity believes. This is what Judaism believes. This is what Hinduism believes. I know both of my children took a course I'm pretty sure they took a course in high school on world religions, and they found it fascinating to learn about other religions, and they felt that their teacher was really honest and fair. Now, they didn't know anything about it to know whether they were being fair or not, but they did feel like it was respectful, and that I think we should honor that. And the reading of the Bible is just going to open up the next, let's say, the next trend, that the next thing you'll do is they're going to be reading from the Quran. And now what are you going to say? How are you going to fight against that? I think that we should have equal time. If we're going to read from the Bible, then I think we should be reading from other major religious texts.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Instead of proselytizing one, just kind of informing. That's what school's for, is to inform and educate kids on things.
If you're going to go in that direction, you're going to have to be fair and just.
Yeah, well, what kind of skills should pastors be developing in order to cultivate cultures that have political conversations in constructive ways?
Well, I think they need to be informed. I just saw a book. I just got this book in the mail. Faithful Politics by Miranda Zapur Cruz. 10 Approaches to Christian Citizenship and Why It Matters.
Oh, that sounds interesting.
Okay, now, I don't know a thing about this book. Not a thing. But my guess is this pastor should read books like this and become aware of options.
Mm-hmm.
And they should teach those options in the appropriate setting in churches. Sometimes it would be a small group reading this book to find out what kind of conversations were being had and say, would this be healthy for the whole church? And if it would be, then you spread it through the whole church. You might do some adult Sunday school classes on it. You might have some youth teaching about it. You might do a series of sermons about it. But we need to create cultures that are informed, and we need to create cultures that are oriented toward the kingdom of God, toward Jesus as Lord, rather than toward political persuasions being the ultimate loyalty that we are expected to have. And I think we can model conversations. Tom, I think you and I could have some pretty intelligent conversations about political differences. I think both of us can distance ourselves from what we believe enough to listen to the other person and to understand it well enough that the other person say, yeah, you understand what I'm thinking. And that we could say, this is where I would differ and this is where I agree. We need to model that sort of thing in our churches. We need to hold up role models of people who are doing this well. And frankly, college teachers who teach political science are really good explainers of political theories.
Mm-hmm.
And most people don't know political theory.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how many Americans actually understand how the economy of the United States works?
Right.
We need to have, let's say, a discipleship of economics. Economic discipleship. We teach, let's say, some things, basic principles of the Bible, but also how economy works. That, okay, let's just say, all right, we live in a capitalist society. I want to say to people, deal with it first, because that's where we are. All right. Here's how it works: is that we create a culture in our families. This is where it starts, of ambition, responsibility, accountability, so that we grow up and we believe that we should get a job if we want to have enough money to pay for food and clothing and a house. And then we believe that this should be passed on and transmission to the next culture. That's how the economy in the United States works. Now, I'm the first person to say, I'm not the first, but I would chime in with people who say, not everybody has the same advantage. Okay, we need to recognize inequalities and inequities in the American system, and as churches offer some answers. But we also need to understand Christian principles of generosity, of a work ethic, of providing for family, of let's say caring for the poor, of giving to our church. All these things come into play when we have a discipleship that's concerned with economics. Now, there's all kinds of topics like this that can be addressed in a church, and I think that we can discuss these things, and we can become role models for this, and over time chip away at creating a culture that would nurture this. And it'll take, I've written a book with my daughter called Pivot, and in that book we have a section that shows that the standard principle of transforming a culture takes 7 years when the culture wants to change. So let's just say you're in for a decade of discipleship on politics, and it's going to take that long to create a culture that can actually embody that in a way that people say, this is the way we behave in this congregation.
Wow, I like that. Well, I have one last question. And what do you think the church will look like in 5 to 10 years if our current trajectory continues or accelerates? What do you see? That is a neutral question.
Yeah, I
What do you
wish,
see?
I get asked questions like this, and I'm not very good. I'm not a futurist. That doesn't mean I'm not a prophet. I don't consider myself a prophet at all, but I'm not very good at predicting. Because our culture is so big, we'll have a lot. I'd say the vast majority of the church will be just like it is now in 10 years. I think the numbers indicate that the evangelical church is declining now, like the main line. If the church wants to grow, it's going to have more babies. Demographics are a lot more involved than people recognize. I think there will be less money for church buildings that we have now. I think it's going to be economically challenging for a lot of churches. I believe that we will probably move away from seminary education within 10 to 20 years, the way we see it now, except for wealthy people. I think seminaries will be morphed into institutions within a church where people are trained to pastor, rather than going for an academic educational experience at a seminary. So those are some of the things that I think we'll see. But I think the church will be smaller in 10 years in numbers. I think the evangelical movement would be probably closer to, what is it right now, 27%? I think it'd be 20% in 10 years.
Well, I have really appreciated this conversation. I know you would bring some sanity and some wisdom. So I don't know. I didn't know how much you actually took on these topics, but it seemed like it's a big issue with people leaving the church to search for Christ, and I wanted to just take it from that angle. And I really appreciate your honesty and your willingness to have a good conversation about it.
Yeah, you got me to talk about things I'm not used to talking about, so I appreciate that.
Well, you offered some very intelligent insights, and I learned a lot of things, and I'm really happy we had it. So thanks for coming on the show today. It's been amazing.
Thank you, Tom.